The morning sun rose over New Haven Colony like it did every other day, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange that still amaze the settlers even after 5 years of living there. Commander Jake Morrison stood at his kitchen window, watching his 9-year-old daughter Lucy pack her school bag with the kind of chaotic energy only children seem to possess. She stuffed books and supplies into the bag while simultaneously trying to finish her breakfast and tell him about the science project she was working on with her friend. Katie Jake smiled and nodded at the appropriate moments, sipping his coffee and feeling grateful for the peaceful life they had built on this distant world. New Haven was home to 50,000 people who had left Earth seeking something quieter, something safer for their families. The colony sprawled across a green valley, surrounded by gentle hills, with farms and homes and schools that looked almost exactly like the ones back on Earth. It was paradise. Or as close to paradise as humans had managed to find among the stars. The school bus arrived right on schedule. At 7:30 in the morning, its yellow paint bright against the alien landscape. Jake walked Lucy to the corner where she joined a group of other children, all chattering and laughing as they climbed aboard. He waved as the bus pulled away, watching until it disappeared around the corner toward the main road. Then he headed to the garrison where he commanded the small defense force that kept the colony safe. It was an easy job most days, monitoring sensor arrays and coordinating with orbital stations, making sure nothing dangerous came near their little slice of heaven. The morning passed quietly in the garrison command center. Jake reviewed supply reports and approved maintenance schedules while his officers monitored their screens with the kind of relaxed attention that came from months of nothing ever happening. Lieutenant Amy Chen worked at the communications station, humming softly to herself as she processed routine transmissions from the farming districts. Everything was normal. Everything was peaceful. Everything was exactly as it should be. Then, at 11:15, Jake's personal communicator buzzed with an incoming call. The screen showed it was from Lucy's school principal, Helen Martinez. Jake answered with a casual greeting, expecting some routine question about a permission slip or a scheduling issue. What he heard instead made his blood run cold. The buses had never arrived at school. All 5 buses that picked up children from different districts around the colony had simply failed to show up. At first, the teachers thought there might have been some delay or mechanical problem, but when they tried to contact the drivers, nobody answered. When they sent staff members to check the routes, they found the buses abandoned on the side of the road, empty and silent with their doors hanging open. Jake was moving before Principal Martinez finished talking. He barked orders to his officers, initiating a colony-wide alert and mobilizing every available security team. Within minutes, vehicles were racing toward the locations where the buses had been found. While overhead drones launched to scan the surrounding areas, Jake jumped into his command vehicle and headed for the nearest bus location himself, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it over the engine noise. The bus sat on a quiet stretch of road about 3 miles from the school, positioned at an odd angle as if it had pulled over suddenly. Jake approached carefully, his hand on his sidearm, even though he knew it was probably too late for weapons to matter. The interior of the bus looked undisturbed, with backpacks still on seats and a lunchbox lying open in the aisle. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of violence. The children had simply vanished. Lieutenant Chen arrived a few minutes later with portable scanning equipment. She moved around the bus slowly, her handheld device beeping and clicking as it analyzed everything. Jake watched her face grow more concerned with each passing minute. Finally, she looked up at him and shook her head. The scans were picking up an energy signature that didn't match anything in their database. Something that definitely wasn't human technology, and didn't correspond to any of the friendly alien species they had regular contact with. By noon, all 5 buses had been located and examined. The story was the same at each site: empty buses, abandoned belongings, and that same strange energy signature. 207 children between the ages of 5 and 14 had disappeared without a trace. The colony descended into chaos as the news spread, with parents flooding the garrison demanding answers and search parties forming spontaneously to comb the countryside. Jake ordered roadblocks on every route out of the valley and deployed every drone and sensor they had. But deep down, he knew they weren't going to find the children nearby. Amy worked through the afternoon analyzing the energy signatures, cross-referencing them against every database Earth had provided to the colonies. As evening fell, she finally found a match. The signature belonged to Krell's syndicate ships, vessels used by one of the most notorious criminal organizations in known space. The Krell were slavers and smugglers who operated in the lawless regions beyond Galactic Council jurisdiction, kidnapping sentient beings and selling them to buyers across the galaxy. Jake felt rage building in his chest, a hot, burning anger unlike anything he had experienced before. His little girl was out there somewhere, scared and alone, in the hands of aliens who saw her as merchandise. Every parent in the colony was feeling the same thing, that primal fury that came from having their children threatened. But Jake forced himself to think clearly. To focus on what needed to be done rather than what he wanted to do, he sent an emergency transmission to Earth Defense Command, using the colony's most powerful communications array. The message was simple and direct. New Haven had been attacked. 207 children had been taken by Krell slavers, and they needed immediate military assistance. He also sent a formal complaint to the Galactic Council, citing the treaty provisions that guaranteed protection for human colonies and demanding they take action against the Krell. Then Jake gathered the colony's militia leaders and began organizing a proper response. They would expand the search perimeter, to fortify the colony's defenses in case the Krell came back, and prepare for whatever came next. He moved through the tasks mechanically, giving orders and making decisions while a part of his mind stayed focused on Lucy. He remembered her smile that morning, the way she had chattered about her science project, the casual wave she gave him as the bus pulled away. He remembered thinking how lucky they were to have found such a peaceful place to raise her. Now that peace was shattered. And Jake knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The Krell had made a terrible mistake when they took those children. They had no idea what they had just unleashed, what humans were capable of when their young were threatened. Jake stared at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky and made a silent promise to his daughter. He was coming for her, and he wouldn't stop until she was home. Admiral Richard Blake arrived at New Haven. Exactly 48 hours after, Jake sent the emergency transmission to Earth. His fleet dropped out of hyperspace in orbit above the colony. 6 warships that represented a significant portion of Earth's defensive capability in this sector. Jake watched from the garrison command center as the ships took up positions, their presence both reassuring and ominous. Earth was taking this seriously, which meant the situation was even worse than he had feared. Blake came down to the surface within an hour of arrival. A tall man in his 60s with gray hair and eyes that had seen more than most people could imagine. He greeted Jake with a firm handshake and then asked to speak privately in a secure location. Jake led him to a shielded conference room deep in the garrison, a place designed to prevent any electronic eavesdropping. The moment the door sealed behind them, Blake's expression changed from professional concern to something much more serious. The Admiral pulled out a data tablet and placed it on the table between them. He told Jake that what he was about to learn was classified at the highest levels, information that fewer than 1,000 people on Earth were cleared to know. The kidnapping of New Haven's children had triggered protocols that required this information to be shared, because what came next would only make sense with the full context. Jake sat down slowly, his mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. Blake began to talk, and with each word, Jake's understanding of humanity's place in the galaxy shifted. When Earth first made contact with the Galactic Council 200 years ago, it had been a momentous occasion celebrated around the world. Humanity had finally found proof they weren't alone in the universe. And better yet, they had found civilizations willing to welcome them into a larger community. But what the public was told about those early years wasn't the complete truth. The Galactic Council had subjected humanity to extensive testing and evaluation, as they did with all newly discovered species. Medical examinations, psychological assessments, cultural studies, biological analyses, designed to determine how humans would fit into galactic society. What they discovered during those tests had shocked them. Humans possessed a combination of traits that no other known species had. Traits that made them uniquely dangerous in ways the Council found deeply troubling, Blake explained. That humans had evolved as persistent hunters on Earth, capable of tracking prey for days or even weeks without giving up. Their endurance was extraordinary compared to most alien species, able to function in extreme conditions that would kill or disable others. But it wasn't just physical endurance that concerned the Council. Humans had psychological traits that were equally unusual, particularly their ability to form bonds with individuals outside their own species, and a tendency to treat those bonded individuals as family, worth dying for. The Council scientists had documented something they called the protective rage response, a biological reaction that occurred when humans perceive threats to their pack members, especially their young. When triggered, human bodies flooded with chemicals that overrode pain receptors, increased physical strength, and removed the psychological limiters that normally prevented self-destructive behavior. Combined with human intelligence and tool-using capabilities, this made them almost unstoppable when pursuing threats to their children. Jake listened in stunned silence as Blake continued. The Council had debated for years about what to do with this dangerous new species they had discovered. Some argued for quarantine, others for careful integration with strict monitoring. Eventually, they settled on a compromise: the Treaty of Titan. On paper, the treaty was presented as a mutual agreement that benefited both humanity and the galactic community. Earth would gain access to certain technologies and trade opportunities, while the Council would gain a new member species. But the real purpose of the treaty was containment. Humanity was restricted to a small sector of space, limited in how many colonies they could establish and how large their military forces could grow. The Council promised to protect human settlements from hostile species and ensure that no one would target Earth or its colonies. In exchange, humans would stay in their designated area and not expand too aggressively into the wider galaxy. Most humans saw it as a fair deal, a way to ensure peaceful coexistence with their new neighbors. Now the Krell Syndicate had violated that protection, kidnapping children from a human colony in what should have been perfectly safe space. Jake felt his anger building again, but Blake wasn't finished. The Admiral pulled up files on his tablet showing intercepted communications and intelligence reports. Earth's spy networks had been tracking unusual activity in Council channels over the past few months. Encrypted discussions between certain Council members and known criminal elements. The evidence suggested that elements within the Galactic Council itself had been involved in arranging the kidnapping, not the entire Council, but a faction that believed humanity needed to be dealt with more harshly than the Treaty of Titan allowed. They wanted humans to react to the kidnapping, to send military forces in pursuit of their children, despite Council warnings not to. That reaction would give them legal justification to impose harsher restrictions on Earth, possibly even military action to enforce compliance. Jake felt sick as he processed the implications. The Council was supposed to protect them, but instead, some of its members had orchestrated an attack on children to provoke a political crisis. Blake confirmed that Earth's government had concluded they couldn't trust the Council to handle this situation. If they waited for official diplomatic channels to work, the children would likely be sold and scattered across the galaxy before any negotiation could succeed. That was why Blake had come with more than just warships. Earth had activated Protocol Shepard, a contingency plan developed years ago for exactly this type of scenario. Hidden from public view and even from most government officials, Earth had been training special forces units designed specifically for rescue operations in hostile alien territory. These teams, called strategic rescue units, but universally known as hunters, were humanity's answer to the limitations the Council had tried to impose. The hunter assigned to recover New Haven's children was already in transit. Captain Laura Bennett commanded a 12-person team with more successful rescue operations than any other unit in the program. She had brought people home from pirate stations, slave markets, and hostile worlds across dozens of star systems. If anyone could find the children and bring them back, it was Laura and her team. But there was a complication that made everything more dangerous. The Galactic Council had officially forbidden any human military action in response to the kidnapping. They claimed they would negotiate for the children's release through proper diplomatic channels, and any independent human operation would be considered an act of aggression against council authority. Ambassador Trell, a senior council representative, was already on his way to New Haven to ensure compliance with this directive. Blake leaned forward, his expression hard. Earth's government had made a decision that would change everything. They were going to ignore the council's orders and send the hunters anyway. The children were more important than politics or treaties or maintaining good relations with aliens who might have betrayed them. If the council wanted to impose consequences after the rescue, Earth would deal with that when the time came. Jake felt something shift inside him as he listened. All his life he had believed in following proper procedures, working within established systems, trusting that institutions would do the right thing. Now he understood that sometimes the right thing meant breaking rules that were designed to keep you weak. He looked at Blake and asked what he could do to help. The Admiral smiled grimly. Jake's job was to keep the colony stable and prevent panic, while also preparing for the possibility that the situation might escalate into something bigger. He needed to quietly strengthen New Haven's defenses and reach out to other colony commanders, warning them to be ready for trouble. Most importantly, he needed to keep Ambassador Trell occupied and distracted when he arrived. Preventing him from interfering with operations he knew nothing about, Blake stood and prepared to return to his ship. Before he left, he placed a hand on Jake's shoulder and told him something that Jake would remember for the rest of his life. The hunters would bring the children home. That was what they did, what they were built for, what they had never failed to accomplish. The galaxy thought it understood what humans were capable of. But it was about to learn that humans had spent 2 centuries preparing for the day. When the Council's protection failed, that day had come. And now the galaxy would see what humanity really was when their children were threatened, Captain. Laura Bennett stood on the bridge of the stealth ship Nightfall, watching the stars blur past as they tracked the Krell Syndicate across 3 different star systems. Her team of 12 specialists worked quietly at their stations, each one focused on their particular role in the hunt. They had been following the energy signature for 6 days now, piecing together the trail like detectives solving a crime. And finally, they were getting close to answers. Corporal Danny Hayes sat at the technical station, his fingers dancing across holographic displays as he analyzed data from a dozen different sensors. Danny was the youngest member of the team at 23, but he had a gift for understanding alien technology that made him invaluable. He had traced the Krell ships through hyperspace jumps and course corrections, following a trail that would have been invisible to most human tracking systems. Now he was picking up something new, a concentration of similar energy signatures in a region of space. Known for being dangerous and lawless, Laura moved to stand behind Danny's station, reading the data over his shoulder. The signatures were coming from a location called Terminus Station. It's a massive trading hub that existed outside Galactic Council jurisdiction. Terminus was where the galaxy's criminals came to do business, a place where laws didn't apply and violence was just another form of negotiation. It was exactly the kind of place Krell slavers would use to sell their stolen cargo. The plan came together quickly because Laura's team had done this kind of operation before. They would approach Terminus disguised as independent mercenaries looking for work. It's a common enough sight in a place like this that no one would look twice. Their equipment would be hidden in cargo containers marked as personal supplies, and their ship's identification would be scrambled to show them as registered traders from a neutral system. Once inside, it would use contacts and information gathering to locate the Krell who had taken the children. Terminus Station grew larger in their viewports as they approached, a sprawling structure that looked like it had been built from pieces of 100 different ships welded together over decades. Docking bays jutted out at odd angles, and the whole thing was lit by harsh lights that cast deep shadows across its surface. Laura felt the familiar mix of tension and focus that came before dangerous operations. This was what she had trained for, what her whole team had prepared themselves to handle. They docked without incident, and paid the exorbitant fees that Terminus charged for everything. The interior of the station was crowded and chaotic, with aliens of dozens of different species, moving through corridors that smelled of oil and recycled air and things Laura couldn't identify. Her team split into smaller groups to avoid drawing attention. Each group heading to different sections of the station to gather information. Laura took 2 team members, Sergeant Kevin Barnes and Specialist Nicole Green, to the bar district, where information brokers typically operated. The bars on Terminus were loud and dangerous, filled with the kind of people who would kill you for looking at them wrong. But they were also places where secrets were traded like currency. Laura needed those secrets. It took 4 hours and a considerable amount of money. But eventually they found someone willing to talk. A Zithian information broker named Skrell agreed to meet them in a private booth after. Laura showed him enough credits to make it worth his while. Skrell was a nervous creature with too many eyes and a tendency to twitch when he talked. But he knew everything that happened on Terminus. Laura described what they were looking for without mentioning that the cargo was human children. She said they were tracking a Krell merchant who had recently acquired valuable specimens and wanted to know where those specimens might have gone. Skrell's eyes widened at the mention of the Krell, and he glanced around nervously before leaning in close. The broker told them about a Krell named Vexther, who specialized in acquiring rare and illegal goods. Vexther had indeed passed through Terminus about 5 days earlier with cargo that matched Laura's description. But Vexther hadn't kept the cargo. He had sold it to someone much more dangerous, a collector named Zal, who operated from somewhere. In the Void Reaches, Laura felt her stomach tighten at the mention of the Void Reaches. That region of space was unmapped and filled with dangerous anomalies, a perfect hiding place for illegal operations. Zal was known throughout criminal networks as someone who collected rare specimens for wealthy buyers, keeping them in a hidden facility until the sales were complete. Skrell warned that Zal's location was one of the most closely guarded secrets in the underworld, and trying to find it would likely get them killed. Kevin leaned forward and asked how much it would cost to learn that secret. Skrell's eyes widened even further, and he named a price that would bankrupt most small trading companies. Laura transferred the credits without hesitation. Money meant nothing compared to bringing those children home. Skrell provided coordinates to a dead freighter in the Void Reaches, a massive derelict that was actually Zal's facility in disguise. He also provided security codes and patrol schedules, information that would have been impossible to get any other way. Laura thanked him and left quickly before anyone else in the bar took too much interest in their conversation. Back on the Nightfall, Laura gathered her team and shared what they had learned. Danny confirmed that the coordinates matched unusual power signatures he had been tracking. Hidden among the natural interference of the Void Reaches, they had found the children, or at least found where the children were being held. Now came the hard part. Meanwhile, on New Haven, Jake Morrison dealt with the arrival of Ambassador Trell, the Council. Representative came with a small entourage and immediately began making speeches about how the Council was working tirelessly to secure the children's release through proper diplomatic channels. Trell spoke with the kind of smooth confidence that politicians perfected, assuring everyone that violence and military action would only endanger the children further. Jake listened politely while his instincts screamed that something was wrong. Trell's words sounded reasonable, but there was something in his eyes that didn't match the concern in his voice. When Jake pressed for specific details about the diplomatic efforts, Trell became vague and evasive. He talked about ongoing negotiations and delicate situations, but never provided actual information about what was being done. The ambassador also brought a warning. Any independent human military action would be seen as a violation of galactic law and could result in severe consequences for Earth. The Council took such matters, and humanity's position in galactic society depended on following proper procedures. Terrell made it clear that he expected Jake to prevent any unauthorized rescue attempts, and to report immediately if he heard about such plans. Jake nodded and made appropriate sounds of agreement, while privately deciding that Trell could go to hell. His daughter was out there somewhere, and he wasn't going to let politics and bureaucracy determine whether she came home. He began quietly preparing New Haven's militia and reaching out to other colony commanders, with coded messages warning them to strengthen their defenses. Something bigger was happening, and Jake intended to be ready when it all came apart. In the Void Reaches, as the nightfall approached, the coordinates Skrell had provided. What appeared on their sensors as a dead freighter was actually a massive station with active power systems, hidden behind sophisticated camouflage. Laura's team spent 2 days conducting surveillance, using passive sensors to map the station's layout and identify security measures. They confirmed that the children were being held in detention cells on the lower levels. Alive and apparently unharmed, but clearly frightened, Zal's facility was heavily defended with automated weapons systems and Krell guards patrolling every section. A direct assault would trigger alarms and could result in the children being harmed before the team could reach them. Laura studied the layout for hours, running simulations and considering options. Finally, she developed a plan that might work. The team would split into 3 groups. Danny and 2 others would infiltrate the engineering section and sabotage the station's power grid and weapon systems. 4 team members would secure the main docking bay and prepare the Nightfall for immediate departure. Laura would lead the remaining 5 into the detention level to extract the children. Timing would be critical and everything had to happen simultaneously. They launched the operation at 3 a.m. station time, when guard rotations were changing. Everything went according to plan initially, with each team reaching their objectives without triggering alarms. Laura's group moved through darkened corridors, using night vision, and reached the detention cells exactly on schedule. The moment Laura opened the first cell door and saw the children inside, she felt her heart break. They were dirty and scared, huddled together in the corner with eyes that had seen too much fear. But when they saw Laura's face and heard her speak in English, hope flooded back into those young eyes. She told them quietly that she was there to take them home, and she watched as tears of relief began to flow. Then the alarms started, screaming. The alarms turned the station into chaos within seconds. Laura grabbed the nearest child and shouted for her team to move, leading the way through corridors that were suddenly filling with emergency lighting and the sound of boots running toward their position. The children stayed close, holding hands in a line as the hunters surrounded them with their bodies, creating a protective barrier against whatever was coming. Sergeant Kevin Barnes took point position, his weapon raised as they turned corners and pushed through access doors. Behind them, Specialist Nicole Green covered their retreat, firing controlled bursts at Krell guards who appeared in the corridors. The children stayed remarkably calm considering the situation, following instructions exactly as Laura's team guided them toward the docking bay. Lucy Morrison held the hand of a younger girl named Sophie, whispering encouragement as they ran. Danny's voice came through Laura's earpiece. Reporting that the power sabotage was complete, but the station's backup systems had activated faster than expected. The automated weapons were still offline, but manual systems were coming online and Krell reinforcements were pouring in from other sections. The team at the docking bay confirmed the Nightfall was ready for immediate departure. Engines hot and moorings released. The corridor leading to the docking bay became a shooting gallery. As Krell guards established defensive positions, Kevin moved forward with 2 other team members, laying down suppressing fire while Laura herded the children through a side passage that Danny had identified as an alternate route. The detour added precious minutes to their escape, but it kept the children out of direct combat. They burst through the final door into the docking bay to find the Nightfall waiting with its boarding ramp extended. Laura counted heads as children scrambled up the ramp, making sure every single one made it aboard before she followed. Kevin and his group came through the door last, moving backward while firing at pursuing guards. The moment everyone was inside, the ramp sealed and the Nightfall lifted off. Krell fighters launched from other bays, trying to intercept them before they could jump to hyperspace. The Nightfall's pilot, Lieutenant Chris Morgan, flew with the kind of skill that came from years of experience in dangerous situations. He twisted the ship through the station's superstructure, using debris and support struts as cover, while the hyperdrive charged. Weapons fire from the Krell fighters sparked against their shields, but Chris kept them moving too fast to be an easy target. Laura moved through the ship checking on the children. Most were crying now that the immediate danger had passed. Tears of relief and fear and overwhelming emotion. Her medic, Corporal Maria Santos, was already treating minor injuries and shock while reassuring everyone that they were safe now. Lucy Morrison sat with a group of other children, her arms around 2 younger kids who were sobbing into her shoulders. The hyperdrive reached full charge and Chris engaged it without waiting for clearance. The stars stretched into lines as they jumped away from Terminus Station and the void reaches, heading back to a RD human space. Laura allowed herself to breathe for the first time in what felt like hours. They had done it. All 207 children were aboard and alive. Heading home to their families then, the ship's sensors detected something impossible. They dropped out of hyperspace 3 hours into the journey, the drives automatically shutting down when they encountered an interdiction field. Laura rushed to the bridge to find Chris staring at his displays in disbelief. A Galactic Council fleet had appeared around them, led by a massive flagship that Laura recognized from intelligence briefings as Ambassador Trell's personal vessel, the communication channel activated without them opening it. A clear sign of the technological superiority the Council maintained over human ships. Trell's voice filled the bridge, smooth and commanding, as he ordered the Nightfall to stand down and prepare to be boarded. He stated that the humans had violated galactic law by conducting military operations without Council authorization and must surrender the children to Council custody immediately. Laura felt rage building in her chest. As she understood what was happening, this was a trap, carefully planned and executed. She responded that the children were human, citizens being returned to their families, and she would not be surrendering them to anyone. Trell's voice hardened as he repeated the order, adding that failure to comply would be considered an act of war against the Galactic Council. Chris attempted to jump to hyperspace again, but the interdiction field held them in place. They were trapped, surrounded by Council ships that could destroy the Nightfall with a single volley. Laura stood frozen, weighing impossible options while 207 children sat in her cargo, Bay trusting her to get them home. On New Haven, Jake Morrison was working in the Garrison Command Center when Amy Chen called him over to her station. She had intercepted an encrypted transmission between Trell's flagship and an unknown recipient in Council space. The encryption was sophisticated, but Amy had been working on it for hours and had managed to decode portions of the message. What she showed Jake made his blood run cold. The transmission contained references to the kidnapping operation. Discussing timing and coordination with Krell contacts, it mentioned the need to provoke a human military response that could be used to justify Council intervention. Most damning of all, it included casualty estimates for what would happen if the humans were forced into armed conflict with Council forces. Jake immediately ordered his technical team to focus all resources on decoding the complete transmission. He also sent urgent messages to Admiral Blake and to Earth Defense Command, sharing what they had discovered so far. Within an hour, Amy had decoded enough to reveal the full scope of the conspiracy elements within the Galactic Council had arranged the kidnapping specifically to create this situation. They feared humanity's potential and wanted legal justification to impose harsher restrictions or possibly remove humans from their sector of space entirely. The kidnapping was designed to provoke exactly the response that had occurred, then use that response as proof that humans were too dangerous to be allowed freedom of movement in the galaxy. Jake felt something break inside him as he read the decoded messages. The Council was supposed to protect human colonies under the Treaty of Titan, but instead they had orchestrated an attack on children to advance their political goals. He transmitted everything to Blake's fleet and to the Nightfall, making sure Laura knew what she was facing. The information spread rapidly through human communication networks. Earth's government received the evidence and immediately called an emergency session. Military commanders across human space went to high alert. Colonial governors began preparing their populations for the possibility of conflict. Everyone who saw the decoded transmissions understood that the galaxy had just changed in fundamental ways. Admiral Blake received authorization from Earth to deploy the full defensive fleet to Laura's position. What the Council didn't know was that humanity had been preparing for potential conflict since the Treaty of Titan was signed. The treaty limited expansion, but said nothing about technological development. And Earth's engineers had been very busy for 200 years. Blake's fleet jumped into the region where the Nightfall was trapped. But instead of the small defensive force the Council expected, 47 warships emerged from hyperspace. They were equipped with weapons and shields that incorporated technology the Council had never seen, innovations that human scientists had developed in secret while appearing to comply with treaty limitations. The Council fleet suddenly found itself facing an opponent that was supposed to be contained and harmless. Blake opened communication channels to Trell's flagship and transmitted the decoded messages on all frequencies, making sure every Council ship could see the evidence of conspiracy. He then issued an ultimatum that left no room for misunderstanding. The Council fleet would withdraw immediately and allow the Nightfall to proceed to New Haven, or this situation would become a shooting war. The evidence of Council involvement in the kidnapping would be broadcast to every species in the galaxy. Earth was done following treaties designed to keep them weak, and if the Council wanted conflict, humanity was ready to provide it. Ambassador Terrell attempted to salvage the situation by claiming this had been a rogue operation conducted without Council leadership approval. He offered to withdraw and allow the children to return home, suggesting that both sides should step back and resolve their differences through diplomatic channels. His smooth politician's voice had taken on a note of desperation that everyone could. Here Blake's response was cold and final. Earth rejected any further Council oversight of human affairs. The Treaty of Titan was void the moment Council conspirators arranged the kidnapping. Humanity would no longer accept restrictions on their expansion, their military, or their sovereignty. The Council could either accept these new terms or face the consequences of the war they had tried to engineer. The Council fleet began withdrawing, their ships moving away from the Nightfall and opening a clear path back to human space. Laura watched them go, hardly believing what was happening. Her mission to rescue the children had somehow triggered a complete restructuring of humanity's relationship with the rest of the galaxy. She turned to address the children. Seeing their frightened faces looking up at her, she told them they were going home now, really going home, and nothing was going to stop them. Chris engaged the hyperdrive, and the stars stretched out again as they jumped toward New Haven. Behind them, 2 centuries of careful diplomacy and controlled expansion came to an end, replaced by something the galaxy had tried very hard to prevent. Humanity was free, and the galaxy was about to learn what that really meant. The Nightfall dropped out of hyperspace. Above New Haven, 3 days after leaving the void reaches, and the entire colony seemed to hold its breath as the ship descended toward the landing pad. Jake Morrison stood at the edge of the gathering crowd, scanning the sky until he saw the familiar shape of the stealth vessel breaking through the clouds. His heart pounded so hard he could barely hear the cheers erupting around him as people realized their children were finally coming home. The boarding ramp extended before the engines had fully powered down, and children began streaming out into the arms of parents who had spent 2 weeks living in absolute hell. Jake saw Lucy emerge near the middle of the group, looking thin and tired but alive and whole. She spotted him in the crowd and broke into a run, crashing into his arms with enough force to knock the breath from his lungs. He held her tight while she cried into his shoulder, whispering that she had known he would find her, that she had never stopped believing someone would come. All across the landing pad, families reunited in scenes that would be remembered for generations. Parents clutched their children and refused to let go. Siblings embraced, and grandparents wept with joy. Captain Laura Bennett stood at the bottom of the ramp with her team, watching the reunions with expressions that mixed satisfaction with exhaustion. They had done what they were trained to do, what they had promised to accomplish. And seeing these families whole again made every dangerous moment worth it. But the celebrations couldn't hide the reality that everything had changed. Admiral Blake's fleet remained in orbit, visible reminder that humanity had just broken free from 2 centuries of restrictions. Within days of the children's return, Earth's government issued formal statements declaring the Treaty of Titan null and void. They cited the Council's failure to protect human colonies and the evidence of conspiracy as justification for this action. Humanity would no longer accept limits on their expansion or sovereignty. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to address what they were calling the human crisis. Ambassador Trell had been recalled and was facing investigation for his role in the kidnapping conspiracy. Though many suspected he was simply a convenient scapegoat, Several council species expressed outrage at the actions taken in their name, claiming they had never authorized or approved the plan to provoke humanity. Others argued that the conspiracy proved humans were too dangerous and unpredictable to be allowed. Freedom in galactic space. The council fractured along ideological lines that had been forming for centuries. Some species supported humanity's right to self-determination and questioned why the Treaty of Titan had been necessary in the first place. Others doubled down on the position that humans needed to be contained for the safety of everyone. The debates grew heated as different factions argued over whether to impose sanctions, negotiate new terms, or take military action to enforce council authority. Jake received a promotion to Planetary, Governor of New Haven, in recognition of his handling of the crisis. His first act in the new position was to authorize massive expansion of the colony's defensive capabilities. New Haven would never again be vulnerable to attack, and other human colonies followed his example. Shipyards across human space began operating around the clock, building vessels that incorporated all the technology Earth had developed in secret over the years. The Krell Syndicate discovered that kidnapping human children had been the worst mistake of their criminal careers. Earth declared open season on Krell operations throughout the galaxy, authorizing hunter teams to pursue them anywhere without restriction. Laura Bennett found herself leading an expanded program with dozens of teams deploying across known space. Within 6 months, the Syndicate's leadership was either dead or in human custody, and their slaving operations had been completely dismantled. The message spread quickly. Through criminal networks across the galaxy, humans were not prey, and their children were absolutely off-limits. Species that had never paid attention to humanity before suddenly knew exactly who they were and what they were capable of when provoked. The protective rage response that Council scientists had documented became legend, whispered about in bars and trading posts as a warning against crossing the humans. Laura and her hunter teams became famous throughout human space and notorious beyond it. Statues were erected in their honor, and their names were taught to children as examples of courage and dedication. But more importantly, they became a symbol that humanity would never abandon their own. No matter how far across the galaxy someone was taken, no matter how dangerous the rescue might be, the hunters would come for them. The galactic power structure began shifting in ways that made many species uncomfortable. Human colonies expanded into territories that had been restricted under the treaty, establishing outposts and settlements at a pace that shocked other civilizations. Earth's military grew rapidly, with new ships and weapons that made even the Council's forces reassess their capabilities. Humanity wasn't trying to conquer anyone. They were making it clear they wouldn't be controlled either. Other species began watching humanity's example with interest. If humans could stand up to the Council and renegotiate their position through strength rather than diplomacy, perhaps others could do the same. Several younger civilizations reached out to Earth seeking advice and support, creating informal alliances that worried Council leadership. The carefully maintained order of galactic politics was breaking down, and humanity was at the center of it. Jake stood on a hill overlooking New Haven 18 months after the kidnapping, watching construction crews expand the colony in every direction. The purple alien sky stretched overhead, and in the distance, he could see the landing pads, where new ships arrived daily, bringing more families to the outer rim. Lucy played nearby with her friends, their laughter carrying on the wind like music. She still had nightmares sometimes about her time in captivity, but she was healing with the resilience that children possessed. A message came through on Jake's communicator from Laura. Now, commanding the entire hunter program from a base on Earth, she reported that 3 more species had requested assistance dealing with pirates and slavers operating in their territory. Humanity's reputation as protectors was spreading, and the hunters were becoming known as the people you called when criminals thought they were beyond justice. Laura asked if Jake knew any good officers who might want to join the program, as they were expanding faster than she could train new teams. Jake smiled and promised to send her candidates. New Haven had plenty of people who understood what it meant to have their families threatened and wanted to make sure it never happened to anyone else. The colony was producing a new generation who would grow up knowing that humanity didn't accept victimhood, that they fought for their own and for anyone. else who needed protection. Admiral Blake visited New Haven to inspect the new defensive installations and reported that Earth's government was establishing formal diplomatic relations with several species who had been marginalized by the Council. These alliances were based on mutual respect rather than treaties designed to limit anyone's potential. Humanity was building a different kind of galactic community, one where species helped each other without demanding submission in return. The Galactic Council attempted to reassert authority through various means, but their leverage had disappeared. They couldn't threaten military action against a species that had proven capable of matching their technology. They couldn't impose economic sanctions when human trade networks were growing independent of Council control. They couldn't claim moral authority after the kidnapping conspiracy had exposed their willingness to harm innocents for political gain. Some Council species began negotiating with Earth independently, seeking trade agreements and security arrangements outside official channels. The monolithic structure that had governed the galaxy for thousands of years was fragmenting, and no one knew exactly what would emerge from the chaos. But humanity had made their position clear. They would participate in galactic civilization, equals or not at all. Jake received reports from other colonies describing similar transformations. Everywhere humans lived, they were fortifying their positions and reaching out to form connections with like-minded species. The network of human settlements was becoming something more substantial, a civilization that spanned dozens of star systems and showed no signs of slowing its growth. Lucy called to her father from where she played, asking him to come see something she had built with her friends. Jake walked down the hill to join the children, leaving behind thoughts of politics and power for the simple joy of watching kids play in the afternoon sun. This was what they had fought for, what the hunters risked their lives to protect. What made all the struggle worthwhile in orbit above New Haven? New warships took up defensive positions while transport vessels arrived with more colonists. On Earth, shipyards launched vessels at a rate that would have been impossible under treaty restrictions. Across human space, civilization was emerging that the galaxy had tried very hard to contain and had failed completely. The Council had feared what humanity might come if given freedom, and now that fear was being realized. But humans hadn't become the conquerors or destroyers that some had predicted. They had become exactly what they always were: protectors of their pack, defenders of the innocent, and absolutely relentless in pursuing those who threatened the people they cared about. The galaxy had unleashed humanity's protective instincts by taking their children, and discovered too late that those instincts couldn't be contained once awakened. The fiercest hunters in known space weren't the ones who hunted for sport or profit or conquest. They were the ones who hunted to bring their families home. And they would never stop hunting as long as someone needed protection. Jake watched Lucy laugh with her friends and knew that she would grow up in a galaxy. It's very different from the one he had known. She would live in a universe where humanity stood as equals among the stars, where human children could play without fear, where the hunters watched over them all. The kidnapping had been meant to break humanity's spirit and justify their suppression. Instead, it had freed them completely, and the galaxy would never be the same.